que tenía que haber llegado hacia media hora, más de media hora, y no está llegando, creo. ¿Es ella? ¿Lady? Sí. Bueno, bienvenidos todos a la Universidad ICESI. Para mí es muy satisfactorio estar en la apertura de este 6º Congreso de la Red. El tema es un tema que nos interesa muchísimo en la universidad, y el hecho de que esta red se consolide, crezca y esté ya celebrando un 6º Congreso Nacional, pues es muy buena señal de que se está avanzando en Colombia en este tema complejo de la enseñanza de la ética. Voy a contarles una mini biografía mía de cómo me relaciono yo con el tema y por qué siento tan estrechamente o tan intensamente la importancia del tema que ustedes van a tratar. Yo he sido muy afortunado en mi vida profesional, o mejor dicho, en mis 2 vidas profesionales, porque tengo 2 vidas profesionales. Trabajé más de 25 años en Carvajal, que una organización que se caracterizó en mi experiencia como una empresa con un muy valioso ambiente moral. Tuve la suerte de navegar esos 25 años en ese ambiente rico moralmente, pero siempre me gusta señalar, jamás hablábamos de ética, jamás hablábamos de ética empresarial. Esos términos en esa época no se usaban. Eso de los valores tampoco se usaba en la época, pero Carvajal tenía así unos principios de la organización que eran un documento que todos nos leíamos y todos vivíamos. Tenía una política de trato que incluía temas disciplinarios, realmente un manual de ética del trato interpersonal valioso. En fin, había muchos elementos, y la cultura definitivamente era una cultura ética que yo, afortunadamente digo, porque yo venía de mi vida universitaria, yo soy ingeniero, además de formación, de manera que pueden imaginarse cómo llega uno ingeniero a una empresa y cómo depende de ese clima y ese ambiente de la empresa para su desarrollo moral. Después de esa vida profesional que fue muy rica y moralmente valiosa, vine a parar a la universidad, que en esa época era una escuela de negocios, estilo CESA, para los que vienen de Bogotá o conocen el CESA. Eso era ICESI hace ya más de 20 años cuando llegué acá, cuando empecé mi segunda vida profesional. Y llevaba aquí un par de años cuando tuve la fortuna de que Lelio Fernández, un filósofo que habíamos vinculado a ICESI para que nos ayudara a implementar toda la parte de las humanidades, moral y más integral en un currículo, en un plan de estudios que era muy profesional, en administración fundamentalmente en esa época, me invitó a dictar con él un curso de ética empresarial. Lelio tenía su formación pues como filósofo y tenía una formación fuertísima en ética. Yo le dije, pero Lelio, yo de eso no sé absolutamente nada. Me dijo, es que yo de negocios tampoco sé absolutamente nada. Entonces lo que hicimos fue, usando una expresión del toreo antiguo, hacer el curso al limón, decían los toreros. Cuando entre 2 toreros se enfrentaban al toro, lo llamaban torear a la limón. Y nosotros lo que hicimos fue dictar un curso de ética empresarial a la limón. Entonces yo era el empresario y él era el filósofo, el experto en ética en ese curso. Y ahí empezó mi aprendizaje, que duró con Lelio muchos años, y después con Jerónimo Botero, que quedó acá, que lo reemplazó, también filósofo, también muy fuerte en temas éticos. Y ahí, pegado con ellos, dictando cursos de ética empresarial, fue que comencé a leer y aprender desde los griegos y Aristóteles y Platón, a Sócrates obviamente, y luego los más recientes como Kant o como Smith, y después ahí fue donde aprendí, yo soy ingeniero, repito, y aprendí de Jerónimo a leer a Hume y a entender cómo eso de los sentimientos eran los que manejaban la razón que para mí era tan importante y tan fuerte. En fin, fue un aprendizaje riquísimo, Y tal vez uno de los aprendizajes más importantes allí fue, no me acuerdo dónde leí la frase, pero para mí fue iluminante la apropiación de la frase para el tema. Es una frase de una de estas obras de Montaigne que se llama El burgués gentilhombre, donde el personaje descubre que toda la vida ha hablado en prosa. Y yo descubrí en mis cursos de ética empresarial que toda la vida había estado tomando decisiones éticas, pero pasando por encima, con la fortuna de haber vivido en un buen ambiente moral, pero sin la reflexión y sin la comprensión de que estaba tomando decisiones éticas. Y yo creo que para mí ese fue el principal aprendizaje, y creo que es de lo más valioso que ustedes pueden hacer y que están haciendo, y lo leí ya en un libro que va a presentar mañana Rafael, ya el solo título del prólogo de una profesora brasilera, sí, el hacer conscientes a los jóvenes, ese hacer conscientes, ese aterrizar en que estamos tomando decisiones éticas todos los días para formar esos profesionales del futuro en las distintas áreas en que se están formando en nuestras universidades y ojalá en nuestros colegios, si entran los colegios a la red también, como está proponiendo la colega acá. Ustedes tienen un desafío gigantesco, el país lo grita, necesitamos un comportamiento moral de nuestros ciudadanos, de nuestros empresarios, de nuestros profesionales en general, mucho mejor, y la tarea es de todos, de manera que, repito, celebro esta presencia de ustedes aquí hoy, celebro que estén inaugurando su 6º Congreso de la Red, les deseo todos los éxitos y los dejo. Creo que tenemos ahora, unas palabras de Rafael y una presentación muy especial de nuestro invitado de los Estados Unidos. Muchas gracias por estar acá y muchos éxitos, repito.
Invitamos a Rafael Silva Vega, coordinador del Congreso en la ciudad de Cali, y a Wilson Herrera, coordinador de la red, para que nos den las palabras de bienvenida.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todas y todos. En nombre de la Red para la Enseñanza de la Ética, en nombre de la Universidad ICESI, la Universidad Autónoma de la Universidad Unicatólica y el Centro de Ética y Democracia de la Universidad ICESI, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a todos y todas a este 6º Congreso de Enseñanza de la Ética, que está enfocado en la reflexión sobre la ética de lo público, la educación y el territorio. Una cordial bienvenida al profesor Dale, estamos muy complacidos de su visita a la Universidad ICESI, a el 6º Congreso que nos acompaña. Una bienvenida a todos los compañeros de la red que han trabajado arduamente para que este 6º Congreso se lleve a cabo. Es el 6º, es una actividad muy importante. A los estudiantes, profesores y colegas de otras universidades que nos acompañan, muy complacidos de tenerlos aquí. Vamos a tener una agenda bien interesante. Van a ser 2 días muy intensos. Empezaremos hoy aquí en esta jornada en la mañana en la Universidad ICESI. Continuaremos en la Universidad Autónoma hoy en la tarde, y mañana todo el día estaremos en la Universidad Unicatólica. Así que muchas gracias a todos por su asistencia, estamos muy complacidos de su presencia y le damos la bienvenida a Wilson para que se dirija a ustedes en unas cortas palabras y darle paso al profesor Dale.
Buenas a todos y a todas. Primero que todo, en nombre de los miembros del comité académico de la red, quisiera agradecerles al ICESI y a la Universidad Católica por el esfuerzo inmenso que han hecho en la organización de este 6º Congreso. Quiero referirme a 3 cosas brevemente. La primera, el porqué de la red. Aquí voy a decir 2 cosas. Primero, hay muchos signos que muestran que en Colombia hay un fuerte problema de formación ética y ciudadana. Uno de ellos es la fuerte desigualdad social, indica falta de solidaridad de los ciudadanos. Lo segundo, es la fuerte indiferencia que tenemos hacia las víctimas en todos los niveles, no solamente las víctimas del conflicto, sino también las víctimas de diferentes tipos de opresión, lo cual también muestra, esa falta de indiferencia muestra falta de empatía hacia el otro. Tercero, lo que se ha vuelto común desde el año pasado, que es el tema de la corrupción. Y el tema de la corrupción es preocupante porque buena parte de los grandes escándalos de corrupción son hechos por personas que han sido egresadas de las universidades colombianas, lo cual indica que lo que estamos haciendo en las universidades está mal. Y un cuarto signo del problema es la fuerte intolerancia que hay dentro y fuera de las universidades. Todo eso muestra que hay un problema de formación ética y ciudadana que no hemos sabido enfrentar. Eso es lo primero. Lo segundo que quería decir es en relación con la cuestión de la relación entre educación y democracia. Hay muchas defensas de la democracia. Me voy a referir a dos. La primera dice que la democracia se puede justificar en sí misma porque solamente a través de la democracia podemos ejercer la autonomía. El problema de este tipo de defensas es que a veces las mayorías avasallan a las minorías y más bien lesionan la autonomía de las minorías. Hay una segunda justificación que es más instrumental, y es que la democracia nos permite vivir mejor. Y hay un viejo que sustenta esta tesis, y es en Aristóteles, cuando dice en la política, dos deciden mejor que uno, tres deciden mejor que dos, y una multitud puede decidir mejor que un genio. Para que ese milagro opere, según Aristóteles, es necesario integrar las experiencias diversas de las personas. Y en principio, la democracia sería una forma de integrar esas experiencias. Para que la democracia efectivamente logre decidir mejor, se requiere que los ciudadanos aprendan a decidir bien. Y hay un viejo teorema de un señor Cornu, de pronto algunos de ustedes lo conocen, que muestran que si la gente en promedio decide mal, las decisiones de la democracia son catastróficas. Y un argumento como estos le sirve a uno para cuestionarse qué está pasando con la democracia. La democracia, los sistemas democráticos están tomando muy malas elecciones. Los ciudadanos están eligiendo mal. Y de alguna manera eligen mal porque no están bien formados. Entonces, es como para que la democracia funcione bien, hay un fuerte reto de la formación ética y ciudadana de un país. Ahora, ¿cuál es el problema de la formación ética y ciudadana? Que no es un asunto de una sola institución, la institución educativa, o de un solo actor, los profesores, sino que es una función de todos, es un esfuerzo cooperativo. Y este tipo de acción colectiva es muy difícil de llevar a cabo. No es fácil, y menos en Colombia, donde no sabemos trabajar en equipo. Entonces eso nos pone un reto muy grande en formación ciudadana, porque es como coordinar diferentes agentes para poder formar mejores ciudadanos. Además de que dejo el problema de lado bastante duro que vamos a discutir, qué significa qué significa ser mejor ciudadano. Y esto me lleva a lo tercero. En parte esta iniciativa de la red se dio con esa perspectiva. Hay un serio problema y es necesario dialogar en torno a cómo estamos enseñando la ética. Y este congreso se inició precisamente porque varios de los que estamos aquí teníamos que en nuestras maestrías formar docentes de colegios. ¿Cómo estaban esos docentes haciendo sus prácticas pedagógicas en la formación ética y ciudadana? Eso fue lo que originó la red. Y la red, ya llevamos desde el 2013 para acá trabajando juntos, ha sido un espacio para poder ver esas experiencias. Y este Congreso nos ha servido a nosotros como un laboratorio para ver lo que se está haciendo en las instituciones educativas. Entonces, para la red, este es su espacio fundamental porque es a través de ese espacio en el cual nosotros estamos compartiendo nuestras experiencias. Entonces les damos las gracias por estar aquí, esperamos poder aprender de ustedes y a los que no son miembros de la red están cordialmente invitados para ser miembros de la red. De hecho, precisamente porque nuestro propósito es integrar experiencias, las exigencias de pertenencia a la red son bajas comparados con otras asociaciones científicas. Porque a lo que nos interesa a nosotros es ver qué está pasando en los distintos ámbitos de la sociedad con respecto a la formación ética y ciudadana. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por estar de nuevo aquí y esperamos que estos 2 días podamos aprender muchos mutuamente. Muchas gracias.
Buenos días a todos. Para nosotros en la red es un honor y un gusto enorme tener con nosotros para la lección inaugural de esta mañana al profesor Dale Snewart de la Universidad de Toledo, a quien enseguida presentaré. El profesor Snewart es profesor de filosofía de la educación y director del Centro de No Violencia y Democracia en la Universidad de Toledo, en la Escuela de Educación de la Universidad de Toledo. Es el editor fundador de la revista en línea que se llama Factis Pax, que es un journal sobre educación para la paz y justicia social. Sus intereses investigativos han incluido a lo largo de muchos años de trayectoria la filosofía política, la ética, la teoría de la democracia y la filosofía de la paz, y además los temas de educación para la democracia. Ha enseñado cursos de educación para la democracia y en los últimos años se ha dedicado muy fuertemente a los temas de educación para la paz. Sus estudios incluyen un bachelor en la Universidad de Chicago y un PhD en filosofía de la educación de la Universidad de Illinois. Creo que Johnny, tú también tienes tu doctorado allá. Muy bien. Ha enseñado en la Universidad de Missouri, en la Universidad de Columbia, en Aleph University, y ha sido autor del libro Democracia, Educación y Gobernanza o Gobierno, una concepción del desarrollo, que mereció un premio de la Asociación Americana de Estudios Educativos en el año de 1995. Ha publicado en casi todos los journals que hemos mirado alguna vez, el Journal de Pensamiento Educativo, y el Journal de Filosofía Política, y es el director del Journal en línea de Paz y Conflicto y Resolución de Conflictos. Bueno, muy bien. Es un gusto tenerte con nosotros. It's a very pleasure for us having with us, and welcome to Colombia. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Okay.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Hola, buenos días. It's an honor to be with you to be with you today. I'm so happy that I was able to come here and talk to you today. I'd like to talk about moral theory, both ethics and moral philosophy as it relates to peace education, which I see a strong connection between peace education and democratic education, and as we'll see. I'd like to begin with a joke, maybe an attempt at humor to begin. One night, the fictional president of the United States wakes up in the middle of the night with a revelation, what he thinks is a brilliant idea. And that idea is we should send men to the sun. We should send a spacecraft to the sun. And he's very excited. He's so excited he calls up the head of NASA right away to express his idea and to see if it's possible. And the director of NASA replies, well, Mr. President, I'm very happy that you're interested in space travel and what we do at NASA. It's really great. There's one problem, however, with the idea. And the problem is that if we sent a spacecraft to the sun, as we approach the sun, the spacecraft would burn up. So it is impossible to go to the sun. And the president replies, can't we go at night? A fictional president. No one in mind. What makes it funny is about there's a serious point, I think, about the joke, and that point has to do with perspective and position, as well as validity. And we all know that the sun is a star that has burned and continues to burn for billions of years. We know that it's the center of the solar system within which Earth revolves, etc. And the sun doesn't go out like a light at night. But one could think that if one had a limited perspective, that the sun disappears at night, and one can believe that it goes out. But that would be an invalid, we know now that would be an invalid proposition. So the idea is that perspective and validity are key to, in this case, the epistemological claim that the president was making. But it also, position, perspective, and validity are also extremely important for ethics and for moral judgment, is the point, which we'll get into here in a minute. I'd like to ask two basic questions today, and one is what is the public normative ethical, that is ethical and moral justification for peace education? And in what ways does that justification shape the conceptualization and practice of peace education? You could switch peace to democratic education there as well, among other forms of education. My thesis is that the public justification of peace education and all forms of public education entails the exercise of public reason in terms of both ethical and moral reasons expressed by the public values public values and moral principles. And in turn, this justification calls for educating the capacities of ethical and moral discourse and the virtues of a sense of justice and critical reflection in students. That's my basic thesis in response to the questions I'm entertaining. We can begin with a basic claim that education is a normative practice. And it's a normative practice because for a number of reasons. One of them, centrally, education, the process of education is intentional and purposeful. We aim to do and to shape the hearts and minds of our students. We intend to have profound effects on them. And therefore, that requires those effects require justification. Education also involves the choices about life, about what the good life is, and both for individuals and the society. What kind of life do we want to have? What kind of life do we want to share? Will shape our educational thoughts and practices. Education is also a basic public good. It's important. It's an important social good. Of important value for the society itself, as well as it has individual good. A person who is denied education is in many cases denied a good life. And in the context of a democracy, the political education of citizens, we could argue, has a moral priority. That the political education of citizens is of the highest importance in a democratic society. And I could go on with reasons for why education is normative, but the main point is that we can think of education as a normative practice. That is, it's about what we should do and be. Therefore, because of its normative nature, education requires public justification. It requires that we offer valid public, ethical, and moral reasons for the justified acceptability of our educational policies and practices. That when called upon, leaders, teachers, government officials, citizens should be able to offer public reasons, public justification for policies and practices due to its normative nature. When we speak of justification, we, in practical contexts, in the context of choices about action and behavior, justification means offering reasons for action. So what underlies, what forms the rational basis of the justification of our ethical values and moral principles, and in turn our public policies and practices that comprise the basic structure of a society. So when we speak of justification, we're speaking of the offering of particular kinds of reasons. When we make knowledge claims, epistemological claims, we are called upon to offer reasons that are epistemological in nature. When we make normative claims about what should be, about what is good and what is right, we need to offer ethical and moral reasons for justification, as you well know. The idea of justification is of extreme importance because it relates to justice. There's an intimate connection between ethical and moral justification and justice. On the one hand, the distributive justice, the distribution of social goods in the society is of extreme importance. Who gets what and why is a fundamental question of justice, a basic question of justice. But more fundamental than the distributive question is the question of who determines, who decides, who gets what and why. That justificatory power is the first question of justice. And here I'm influenced by the contemporary German philosopher, Rainer Forst, who's the fourth generation Frankfurt School philosopher, successor of Jürgen Habermas. who's made this important point very clearly. That the first question of justice is not about distribution, but it's about power, and particularly the power to decide the distribution. And this is what he calls fundamental justice. And that fundamental justice as justificatory power stands in opposition to arbitrary rule or domination. And in many cases, governments will engage in policies that really are not ethically or morally justifiable to the population. And when that occurs, then we have a case of arbitrary rule, of unjustified rule. And that's very common across the world. We could call it corruption. This idea of power as the first question of justice transforms the citizen into an agent of justice, rather than a mere recipient of justice. I think that's a very important point, that distributive conceptions of justice treat individual citizens as receivers only, and not active agents in the pursuit of justice. But if we locate power as the first question of justice, then we can understand citizens as the agents of justice, giving them moral agency. And this suggests that a fundamental value of self-determination, the authority to decide, and therefore democracy as the practice of justice, as a discursively justified form of rule in the ideal sense. This also suggests that we need citizens need the capacity to critique relations of justification, in the sense that often there are ideological formations that are unjustifiable, that from a ethical and moral point of view, but are used politically to justify certain policies that often are impartial and discriminatory, etc. So we, as we'll see, an important element of this approach is to include the critique of ideology, as we'll see. An important capacity of moral discourse is also the critique of unjustified rules and policies. From the perspective of power as the first question of justice, inherent in that idea is what Forrest refers to as a basic right to justification. And that leads to the establishment of a basic structure of justification. The argument here is that the most fundamental human right is the right of justification, the right to be offered reasons for policies and practices that affect you. To deny you justification is to treat you either as an object or to treat you as someone who is invisible, who, as Martin Luther King once called a nobody. To be treated as a nobody is the worst kind of offense. To be invisible in one society is a profound act of dehumanization and is profoundly unjust. And that speaks to the a basic right to justification. And as is the case for all rights, there's also then a duty to others to provide justification to others, in particular government officials. Therefore, from this perspective, we need institutional rules and procedures that safeguard and enact the right to justification. Our institutions need to be organized in a way that honors each citizen's right to justification. The idea of a right to justification, a basic structure of justification, implies the existence of public reason, the idea of public reason, that we offer reasons, ethical, moral, practical reasons for our choices of policies and practices by offering reasons in public and or exercising our reason in public, in the public square. That leads, because justification needs to be public, we have to ask what kinds of reasons would count as public reasons. What makes a reason a public reason? That is, what reasons would be acceptable to other reasonable citizens who have different, what John Rawls calls comprehensive doctrines. In most societies, we find a plurality of different philosophies, religious beliefs, metaphysical beliefs, ethical and moral beliefs, etc. There's no agreement per se, usually, about the truth of ethical and moral claims. And therefore, moral truth, as such, cannot be the basis of shared public reasons, because they cannot. What we need in terms of public reason is a mutually recognized point of view, a shared point of view, a shared set of values and principles that we can appeal to, that are commonly understood and accepted by the population. Otherwise, we're talking past each other. We need some kind of common framework of discourse in order to engage in public deliberation and public reason is the idea. And so we, from a normative point of view, we would seek values and principles that can constitute public reasons that are commonly shared. John Rawls expresses this quite clearly in the following quote. I think it's worth quoting. He writes, public reason aims for public justification. We appeal to political conceptions of justice and to a certain evidence and facts open to public view in order to reach conclusions about which we think are the most reasonable and political institutions and practices. Public justification is not simply valid reasoning, but argument addressed to others. It proceeds correctly from premises we accept and think others could reasonably accept to conclusions we think they could also reasonably accept. Within this general notion of public reason, there are two kinds of discourses that are important to distinguish. One is an ethical discourse, and the other is a moral discourse. So this is a distinction made by Rawls, by Habermas, by Forst, among others, that we should think in terms of two categories, normative categories, one ethical and one moral. The ethical refers to values. The moral refers to norms and principles. Both are discursive. They involve the exercise of public deliberation and public reason. But they are, we can understand them as distinct, and I'll explain. Ethical justification refers to considerations of the coherence between our public policies and our values, or the goods we hold, as fundamentally important. And those values define the collective self-understanding and identity of the social group we're a member of, either cultural, national, international, global. And ethical justification refers to such questions as, well, what end should we
¿Qué
pursue?
medios debemos de buscar?
What
¿Qué
constitutes a
debemos de
good
buscar?
life?
¿Qué constituye una buena vida?
Does the choice of particular policy
Las
realize our
decisiones
values, our self-understanding of who we are and what we want to be? So ethical justification in discourse refers to values
Justificación
about
ética
who we
refiere
are and
sobre lo
who
que
we
somos,
want to be,
qué queremos
what
ser,
we find is
lo que
good.
buscamos como bueno.
And these values tend to be context-specific and tend to be pluralistic in their nature. There's a pluralism of values in most societies. Although there's a possibility of shared political values that are freestanding, that is, that are not dependent upon any particular religious or metaphysical point of view, that are political in nature. That and these values can be found in the background political culture of the society. So that's ethical justification in a nutshell, pertaining to values. So we can speak of ethical values. Moral justification refers to considerations of what is right. It refers to moral norms and principles rather than values. It asks what rights and obligations should we affirm. It asks fundamentally what do we owe each other as citizens, as human beings, etc. As members of a shared social space, what do we owe each other in our relationship together? And that's very different than what we value. And moral norms and principles are generated out of these questions. So when we're dealing with moral justification, moral norms and principles, we have to acknowledge again the existence of reasonable pluralism, that is the social fact of plurality of moral and ethical comprehensive doctrines that are grounded in some conception of metaphysical and or normative truth. So many people reasonably and legitimately hold particular moral principles that find their basis and source in particular metaphysical or religious beliefs. They believe in an independent moral order, a fundamental moral nature to the universe, to moral truth, a kind of moral realism. And that's very common in most societies, although not universal. That presents a particular problem, as Rawls and others have pointed out, for democracy under pluralistic conditions. Where do the source of our moral principles arise from, and how can they be justified if we don't agree on the moral truth? A fundamentalist Christian and a fundamentalist Muslim will never agree about the fundamental truth of the whole. They have very different perspectives. Or a Buddhist and a Hindu, although have similarities, might have fundamental disagreements about the nature of the universe and therefore about moral principles. An agreement across those different comprehensive doctrines is highly unlikely. So in a democratic society where we have a pluralism of these ideas and these truths without a common agreement about a truth, what can be the source of common moral principles? And that's a big question. Also, if we can't assume a metaphysical basis to our moral principles, then on what basis can they be justified? One answer is the idea of moral constructivism. This gets into the weeds a little bit. But moral constructivism is a methodology of moral justification that is procedural in nature, that claims that the validity of moral norms is justified by a
morales
procedure of
es justificada
construction,
por un procedimiento de construcción.
first off, and then
Y son aplicadas
once
así, justificando las
we
razones
have justifiable
para las
moral norms,
utilizaciones.
then we can apply them as justification, as justifying reasons for our choices and actions. The method of moral constructivism refers to a process of justification of norms through a procedure of deliberation that is structured and defined in terms of fairness, such that the fair conditions of agreement between the parties, to quote Rawls, represent what citizens would adopt in a situation that is fair between them. The moral legitimacy and the force of the deliberation, of the agreement that comes out of the deliberation, the mutual agreement, is transferred from the normative validity of the elements of fairness to the outcome. So in other words, if we came together as a group, and if we were, our task was to agree, mutually agree on what our moral norms and principles would be, if we could come to an agreement, the agreement would be justifiable if that agreement was constructed, agreed to under certain conditions, in particular the conditions of fairness. If the conditions of our agreement are fair, then the outcome of our agreement is morally justified, is the basic idea. As Rawls suggested, the fairness of the circumstances under which agreement is reached transfers to the principles of justice agreed to. What is just is defined by the outcome of the procedure itself. This is what he called justice as fairness. And this is a democratic kind of justification of moral principles. So what is right is that which we agree to under fair conditions. And the fair conditions are defined in terms of reciprocity. That is, there's fair mutual agreement that no one has reason to reject the proposal, that everyone is included, all are included, everyone who's affected by the norm will have an equal voice in the deliberation, and that the deliberation will be impartial. It'll be free of bias and exclusive self-interest. So reciprocity, generality, impartiality define what fairness is, and they set the conditions for the agreement. This is one methodology of moral justification, which I find very compelling. We could ask then what we listed reciprocity, generality, impartiality as defining fairness. On what basis are those elements of fairness justified? We could get caught in an infinite regress here. We have to stop somewhere. And one idea that Rawls put forth was that the elements of fairness are justified based upon a conception of the person as free and equal, and a conception of the person as free and equal found in democratic societies. So the conditions, the fair conditions of agreement model the nature of the person as a free and equal being. Rainer Faust argues in a more Kantian sense that fairness is based in the mutual recognition of persons as ends, the other being the humanity of the other demands unconditional respect, simply as a human being, and therefore reciprocal, general, and impartial justification. So that's so we have two kinds of normative discourse, of normative justification that pertain to public reason, ethical and moral justification. And we can now turn to those ideas provide us with a framework for thinking about education and peace education in particular. We can place education within the ethical and moral framework as described. So ethical values and moral principles justify the validity and legitimacy of a conception of education, and in turn shape that conception. So our ethical values and our moral principles provide validity, justified validity and legitimacy to our educational choices, but they also shape, influence the nature of those choices, the nature of those practices. Peace education can be defined as an interdisciplinary field of study and learning process designed to develop the capacity of global citizens to critically understand and transform all forms of violence and the patterns of thought that justify them, as well as to envision and pursue a just and peaceful world. There are a number of primary elements. One is that is the focus of peace education. Peace education focuses on learning about the causes that give rise and sustain violence. Peace education involves the approaches to resolving and transforming violent conflict. Peace education involves the articulation and justification, the capacity to articulate and justify ethical values and moral principles that define the normative conditions of peace, which I'm exploring this morning with you. And also the critique of invalid justifications, a critical capacity for critical analysis as well. The core problematic of peace education is violence and injustice. Violence can be defined as avoidable harm, that which impedes the full realization of human potential. And it can take many forms. It can be direct physical force. The ultimate direct physical force is taking another life. The ultimate violence, which completely cuts short the realization of a person's potential because they're no longer alive. Violence can also, and most often, is structural in nature. It inheres in the operation of institutions that function in biased, discriminatory, unfair ways that are justified by invalid political justifications. So there's a whole very potent forms of violence take place through social structures of exploitation in particular and oppression. And there's also cultural violence, a form of which deal with the forms of thoughts and ideas and beliefs and values and moral principles that generally are not justifiable from an objective, impartial point of view, but are used to justify structural and direct violence. So these are unjustifiable ideological formations that are culturally violent because they sustain structural and direct violence. So when we think of violence, we think of the injustice of oppression and domination. Also, a potent form of violence is what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. That is the incapacity to reflect and to think, which he thought was of profound moral importance, the lack of the capacity to reflect and think in the population can lead to great violence and great injustice. So from this perspective, peace always involves justice, that there cannot be peace without justice if we take in the full range of the nature of violence, from direct to cultural. In terms of a curricular and pedagogical orientation to peace education, an orientation that I have found compelling is to look at the logical structure of the discipline that one is teaching, and that the logical structure of the discipline should be the focus of the teaching of that discipline. And this idea comes from John Dewey, Jerome Bruner, an educational philosopher, Israel Scheffler, among others. And the idea is that a discipline is defined by its fundamental ideas, that is, its basic principles, and its forms of thought, that is, its methods of inquiry. So a discipline is defined, a field of knowledge is defined by what its ideas are, its fundamental ideas, its fundamental questions, and also its methods of thinking and inquiry. So we could apply this general orientation to the ethics of teaching and to peace education. So one fundamental idea from the perspective that I have tried to articulate today is that public reason and the right to justification form an ethical and moral framework of peace education. And this is from a normative perspective. That's a fundamental idea that can shape the teaching of peace education and democratic education. And this would therefore focus the educational process on the development of the capacity in students for moral justification and the critique of invalid moral justifications. So engaging students in both processes of moral justification and also having them critique each other's and others' invalid justifications. Also, in the same sense, the development of the capacity for ethical justification to critically reflect on our values, on their individual values and the social values that they are surrounded by in their society. It also would pertain to the cultivation of the duty of civility or a sense of justice. That is, development of a sense of obligation to take into consideration the interests of others and to provide justificatory reasons for one's actions towards others. Essential method of inquiry from the perspective I laid out. That is, in classrooms and in schools, we would engage students with real ethical and moral questions pertaining to peace and justice through discourses of ethical and moral justification. We would also engage fairly in problem posing and critical analysis to interrogate potentially invalid justifications and ideologies in their society. A pedagogy of reflective inquiry would be essentially dialogical. The classroom would be a place of dialogue, also a place of inquiry. The pedagogy would be inquiry-based. We would engage with students in real questions that face them in their society and to probe them as deeply as possible. Engaging in continual reflection. From this perspective, reflective experience is a fundamental part of the educational process. It's very Deweyan and also Freirean that we learn and develop our capacities for thought and action through reflective experience. Not merely experience, but reflection on experience. Inquiry into our experience, both in terms of justification and critical analysis. So to conclude, there is, I believe, a significant convergence of peace education with the democratic education of citizens, and that such an education would focus on the development of the capacity for the exercise of public reason. entailing both the capacity to participate in
la
ethical
capacidad
and
de
moral
participar
discourses of
en discursos
justification
éticos y morales
and critical
de
analysis.
análisis,
That we
de
would
justificación
focus
crítica.
at least our political and moral education on the development of capacities of ethical and moral judgment. And the goal would be efficacy, the
objetivo
ethical,
sería
moral, and political efficacy
la
of
eficacia
citizens.
de
Thank you.
la política moral, ética de los ciudadanos.
If you want, you can sit here and people are going to ask questions. Bueno, vamos a abrir entonces la sesión de diálogo con el auditorio. Quienes quieran hacer comentarios o preguntas al profesor Dale, tienen la palabra, levantan la mano y yo los voy organizando. Andrés. Ya. ¿Quién nos ayuda con el micrófono? Listo.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions, but actually they go together. One of them is about the fact that many people have been talking about peace education in terms of some emotional type of education. They talk about compassion, empathy, and so on and so forth. Do you see a role for emotions here? Because all your emphasis has been on discursive capacities and so on. And the second question, which may have something to do with the first,
La primera es
about
cerca de
despite the fact that you focused mostly or almost exclusively on the development of discursive capacities, you nevertheless talked about the development or cultivation of a kind of sense of justice. I wonder if you think that by trying to develop discursive capacities, that sense of justice will arise or will emerge automatically, or how do you cultivate the sense of justice?
De justicia.
Great question.
Gracias, gran pregunta.
I think you're right. I think your
Pienso que tiene razón.
questions are
Sus
connected
preguntas están conectadas
and
y
get at the idea of empathy,
la idea de empatía
which I see as
veo
fundamental,
como
as basic.
fundamentales.
The development of the emotional capacity for empathy to be able to place oneself
Para
in
ponerse
the
uno mismo en la
position of the
posición
other
del otro
is a
es
basis
una base
for
para
recognizing them
reconocerlos
as a moral being
como un ser moral
and as one who is
y alguien
deserving
que
of
merece
moral recognition,
reconocimiento
ethical and
moral,
moral recognition,
ético,
and
reconocimiento ético y
ethical and
moral
moral response.
y
So
reconocimiento
without
ético y
empathy,
moral. Sin empatía,
moral judgment becomes
el juicio moral se convierte
almost,
en
it can
casi,
become
puede
artificial
ser
or
artificial,
too calculated.
más
It has
calculado,
to be grounded
tiene
in,
que estar
I believe, in
establecido
empathy.
en la
And
empatía.
that speaks to
Y
the
eso habla
development of
acerca
a
de
sense of justice.
el tipo
The
de
sense of
justicia.
justice is basically we
Nosotros
feel a moral
sentimos
connection
una conexión moral
and concern for
y
others,
preocupación por los demás
for their
y para
well-being.
su bienestar y
Or
nosotros
we feel
sentimos
an abiding need
una
to
necesidad de
recognize them,
reconocer,
to respect them
de respetarles
as a
como
person.
una persona o como personas.
And that gives rise to a duty, particular duties. One of the duties, a fundamental duty,
Y
is
uno de los
to
deberes
offer them
fundamentales es
reasons
que ofrecerle razones para
for your choices
para sus
that affect
decisiones.
them.
Eso los afecta a ellos.
So
Entonces,
the sense of justice
El sentido de
is
justicia
is the
es la
basis
base
of
de
justification,
justificación.
which is
lo cual es
something I
Es algo
didn't
que yo
didn't have a chance
no
to talk
tenía,
about,
no
but
tuve la oportunidad de hablar, pero
it's
es
very
muy
important.
importante.
That relates to
Eso
Hannah Arendt's
relaciona
idea of the
con esta
banality of
idea de la
evil,
banalidad
that
demoníaco.
which he developed
Lo
out
cual-
of a case study of Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was in charge of the deportation of Jews and others
la
to the
persona encargada de
concentration camps.
las
And
deportaciones
in
en
his
los campos de
trial in
concentración.
Jerusalem, Arendt noticed she thought she was going to see someone diabolically evil, but he was very ordinary. But he lacked a capacity for empathy and reflection, which led him not to have concern for others, and that was common in Germany in the 1930s. That sense. So they lacked a sense of justice,
Carecían del sentido de
and therefore
justicia
a lack
y
of moral response
de
to others, leading to
respuesta moral.
great atrocity.
lo que conllevó a una gran atrocidad.
I think the capacity
La capacidad
of empathy
de
needs to be
empatía tiene
developed
que ser
early on in
desarrollada
children,
en los niños
from
desde temprana
actually
edad,
from the beginnings of
desde
their lives.
principio de sus vidas.
And the way children learn empathy is
La manera
to
que los niños
have the
aprenden
experience of
empatía es
empathy,
tener una experiencia de
to be
empatía
treated
para ser
and recognized
tratados y
by, in
reconocidos.
particular, adults, in particular their parents, but also adults. When children are treated as
Cuando son
nobodies,
tratados como
they
nadie,
end up
ellos
not having a concern for
terminan no
others.
teniendo.
So the first step in moral
primer paso
recognition
en la
is to
reconocimiento moral
have
es
empathy
tener
towards
empatía hacia
the child.
hacia el niño.
And then that scales up,
Eso
that spirals up
escala
into more abstract
hacia
justifications
más
later
justificaciones
in
abstractas más
their
adelante
development.
en su desarrollo.
So what I described
Entonces,
today
lo que
is more
escribí hoy
at
es más
the
que
secondary
todo
and university level,
un nivel
where
más
we
secundario,
maybe a
universitario,
little earlier,
donde
and we
de
begin
pronto
to
más
engage
temprano,
them
cuando lo
in
empezamos a
more
utilizar
abstract
en más
reflection.
reflexiones
But it
más
must be
altas,
grounded
pero tienen que ser
in an emotional
aterrizadas
capacity, I
en
believe.
capacidades emocionales.
I hope that gets at your, I went on,
Que sí,
long
de hecho,
answer to
una
a great
respuesta muy
question.
larga, una gran pregunta.
Another question.
Otra pregunta.
Good morning. Tú te has referido a esa capacidad crítica de autorreflexión, ¿no?
Maybe
Como,
you should use,
como profesionales, los estudiantes de ética.
el traductor le traduce del español.
Ok. Ok. Very good.
Okay.
Tú te has referido a esa capacidad de autorreflexión crítica que debemos tener todos los profesionales de contaduría. Pero, digamos, si yo analizo los planes de estudio, ética solamente se está dando desde séptimo, octavo o noveno semestre. ¿Cómo generar esa capacidad de autocrítica solamente viéndola en los últimos semestres? Por eso vemos tantas situaciones de corrupción en los profesionales de la contaduría. ¿Cómo generamos que desde la educación, desde los ministerios, se genere realmente un bagaje, digamos, transversal desde primeros semestres? Y yo diría que se tendría que tener también desde la educación media.
That's a huge question. I don't know how to eliminate corruption, unfortunately. I wish I did. I wish I had the answer to. I have a part answer, and that's about to challenge unjustifiable practices is one way, and to continually challenge unjustifiable practices. Do not ever let it go. Always stand up in the face of injustice. Is maybe the only way to.
Es la única
There
manera
are
de,
legal and other methods, but as citizens,
como
it's
ciudadanos, es
incumbent upon us to stand and
nuestra
to speak
responsabilidad de pararnos y hablar
when we see corruption
cuando
and
vemos la
injustice,
corrupción y la injusticia
whenever morally possible.
en
I know
cualquier
sometimes it's not morally
manera
possible.
moral y a veces no
Whenever it
es
is, we should
moralmente.
stand.
Tenemos que pararnos.
I-
Y
The development
El
of the
desarrollo de
capacities
la capacidad
of ethical and moral justification, and also a sense of justice, is in part contingent upon the social context of schooling. It's contingent upon the social climate, the culture of the school, the classroom. And that climate, that culture is very powerful, as we all know. We are shaped in many ways by the cultural context we live in, and children especially so. So a part of democratic education, a part of peace education, would be to work on the social climate of schools, especially in the early grades, so that the climate, the culture is one of care, of concern, of respect among everyone in the environment. And that'll develop in the students certain emotional capacities that later will take the form of more reasonable justification. Empathy can only take us so far. We can only have empathy generally for those we have direct contact with. It's hard to have empathy in the abstract. But societies are run in the abstract. Laws are abstract. And we don't always know who our fellow citizens are. We don't have direct contact with them. So we have to get on the escalator of reason in order to treat them, to have institutions and practices that treat people in fair ways and be committed to the fair treatment of those people. Even though we don't know them, we'll never meet them, we'll never encounter them in our lives. But we have moral concern. But that moral concern has to be on a more abstract level, but grounded in empathy. So we need both empathy and reason. We shouldn't neglect the reason. And just pure empathy often turns into tribalism, that we feel only a connection to those who are like us and exclude those who are not like us. We have to transcend those differences, and the way to transcending those differences is through, I believe, through reason. Once we get on the escalator, the elevator of reason, it will take us to good places.
Thank you. ¿Hay otra pregunta?
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Me gustaría que fuera un poco más específico
Could you be more specific
sobre la
about
relación. Me gustaría que fuera un poco más
could you be more specific about the relationship
de
between
la educación de la paz
the
y
peace
la
education
espiritualidad,
and the spirituality
de la espiritualidad, pero no la espiritualidad, o diferenciarla,
that
la
differentiate
de la
the
religión, y la
spirituality from the
espiritualidad
religion,
que se puede
and
enseñar
they
desde
can
las
be taught from the
instituciones.
institutions.
Y en ese caso,
In
¿cuál
that case,
sería el
what would be the
papel
role
del Estado y
of
de
the
las
state and the
instituciones para la
institutions
enseñanza de la espiritualidad
for teaching
y
the
la educación de la
spirituality
paz, si tiene
and the
alguna
peace
relación?
construction?
I think there is
Yo considero que
is an important place
hay
for
un lugar
spirituality
importante para la
in peace
espiritualidad,
education,
la educación de la
but
paz,
in a more of a universalist point of
pero
view.
desde un punto más universal,
I think we
considero
need to be neutral
que
towards
tenemos que ser
religion
neutral en cuanto a la
in
religión
public educational
en educación
settings.
pública, en
And the
establecimientos
practice
de
of peace
educación pública.
education should be respectful to
Y la
all
educación de la
religions,
paz tiene que ser
but should
respetar
not promote
todas
any particular
las
religion.
religiones,
However,
sin promover una en
because,
particular, porque
peace is
la
and
paz,
peace education
la
are not
educación de
only
la paz no
about
solamente es acerca de
transforming
transformar
the
la
structures of
estructura de la
society,
sociedad,
improving society, and that's its main
mejorar la
goal.
sociedad.
But
Pero
peace education is
la educación de
also
la
and
paz también es
fundamentally about
fundamental
the
sobre la
transformation of
transformación
consciousness
de la conciencia
of people's being,
del ser
students' being in the
del
world.
estudiante.
And that to me
Y eso
is
para mí es
fundamentally
fundamentalmente
has a spiritual
tiene
quality
una
to it.
calidad
espiritual.
That we're dealing with
Estamos
not
lidiando
just
no
the mind,
solamente
but
con la
the
mente,
whole being
pero todo el ser
of the
del
student in peace
estudiante
education.
en la educación de la paz.
And that would include
Y eso
their,
incluye,
for
entre
lack of a
comillas,
better word,
por carencia de un mejor
spiritual
mundo.
well-being. I don't know, that's
No
not a very
sé,
good
una
answer
buena
to your question.
respuesta para su pregunta.
Yes, yes.
Sí lo es, ok.
Hay hay derecho para una última pregunta, pues por el tiempo salimos en 5 minutos de la sesión.
One more question.
Just take advantage.
Oh my God.
One more point about
Un punto más acerca de la espiritualidad.
In order to,
Para-
I believe, in order to
para-
be able to morally respond,
Para moralmente responder el
to
mundo
others,
a los demás,
we have to be present.
necesitamos
We have to be fully, and the
Tenemos
more
que
present
estar
we are in the moment,
procesados.
in relationship to them, the more we can respond.
mejor podemos
If we're not,
responder.
if we're not present, if
Si
we're
no estamos
distracted,
presentes,
off, not awake,
si no estamos despiertos,
we won't be able to
no
morally recognize
podemos
and
moralmente
respond to
reconocer
others. So the cultivation
y
of
reaccionar,
presence, of being present, of being
de estar-
mindful and wide awake
estar despiertos,
is a fundamental
un
requirement of
requisito
moral
moral
response.
de la respuesta
Henry
moral.
David
Y
Thoreau,
Henry
the
David,
American
so,
19th century
en el siglo
philosopher, once described
del siglo
morality
XIX en
as the
Estados Unidos
effort
como el
to throw
esfuerzo
off
de-
sleep.
de,
The effort
de
to throw
tirar
off
el
sleep.
sueño.
And he was
Y
suggesting
entonces está
that
sugiriendo que
to be a moral
para
agent
ser
in
un
the
agente
world,
moral en el
one
mundo
has to be
uno
awake.
tiene que estar despierto.
And the more fully
Y
awake one
entonces
is,
entre
the
más
more present
despiertos esté, más
one
presentes
is,
esté,
the more
más-
responsive one
más
can be.
responsivo
And
va a ser.
presence is,
Y la presencia
is
es
fundamentally
fundamental.
spiritual in my view.
Es,
It's a quality of being mindful,
es una calidad de
being in the
estar
present moment.
en el momento presencial.
Sí, profesor Day, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Una pregunta en relación con su intervención.
Comienza otra vez, por favor.
Sí, en su
Another question
intervención,
in
además de
intervention.
la teoría rolsiana de la justicia, usted
You
menciona
mentioned
también el
also
trabajo
the-
del profesor
The
Johan
work of
Galton, quien en la
John
década de
Galton,
los
who in the
50
1950s
hace una
made a
distinción de
distinction
la
between
violencia
the violence
para
to
aproximarse a la
approximate to
cuestión de
the
la
matter of
educación para la
education
paz.
for peace.
Usted
Peace
mencionaba,
education, you
por
mentioned,
ejemplo,
for example,
esa
that
clasificación
classification of
entre la
between
violencia estructural,
structural violence
la cultural
and the cultural
y la
and
violencia
the
directa.
direct.
Entonces me
So
gustaría
I
de
would
pronto
like to ask you,
que usted
perhaps
nos
you
ampliara un
could
poco más en su
your
apreciación
appreciation or your
sobre esos
observation
retos de una
about those
educación para
challenges
la
about
paz
that peace
en un contexto como el
education
colombiano,
in the Colombian context
atravesado por formas de
that has
violencia
been perpetrated by violence,
directa, estructural,
structural,
cultural,
cultural,
pero sobre todo
and
por
above all,
un conflicto armado de muchas décadas
armed conflict,
que por supuesto
for many wars,
vulnera
that
en
has
especial esa construcción
that
de la
construction of
ciudadanía.
the citizenship.
Es decir,
And
son problemas muy
those problems are
complejos
they're very complex
en donde el
problems
problema de la
where
educación
the
para la paz
education for
en
the peace in
particular
particular
debe abordarse también de
needs
esta
to be
manera
taken upon
compleja.
a complete
Entonces,
manner and
no sé,
bigger
como su
manner.
apreciación
So,
sobre los retos de esa
about the
educación para
challenges
la
of that
paz
peace education
en un contexto como el colombiano
in the Colombian
¿sí?
context,
y frente a estas décadas de
and about
violencia
those decades of
de todo
violence
nivel, digamos.
of all levels.
I'm not an expert
No soy un experto en
on your
su
situation.
situación.
I have general
Yo
knowledge
tengo
of
conocimiento
the
general del
conflict.
conflicto.
I'm not an expert,
No soy un
so,
experto.
but it strikes
Entonces,
me as
me pega una
you have
patada.
suffered, as many societies have suffered from all three kinds of violence that Galtung identified: direct violence, structural violence, and cultural violence. And those kinds of
Esos tipos de violencia
violences are
estructural
linked. They can
están
often be interconnected.
interconectados
So the source
y
of
las
the
fuentes
armed
de
conflict
la
often, a source of the
conflicto
armed
armado
conflict often is structural
son
violence, the existence
violencia
of
estructural,
social injustice, economic injustice, and political injustice
injusticia,
groups are fighting against.
donde se generan las injusticias
And
de todo tipo.
the lack of economic, social, educational opportunity
Oportunidades
can lead
académicas y
to,
sociales
and
pueden
often does
conllevar
lead to violent conflict. And the perpetuation of that
la
structural
perpetuación de
violence,
esa
the injustice over
injusticia
generations is grounded in
está cimentada sobre la
society's
sociedad,
particular
particularmente
unjustifiable beliefs
en
about the
creencias
distribution
no
of
justificadas.
social goods that
Eso tiene que ver
in
con,
part need to be
en parte
challenged
con,
and
tienen que ser
critiqued.
retadas.
I think just as
Y pienso que
an observer,
como un
I think
observador
your
pienso que
society
su
has
sociedad
made
ha
incredible
hecho
progress,
un progreso increíble
and that's obvious.
y es obvio,
But
pero
there are challenges that
hay muchos
of course
retos
remain, and
que
many of
quedan.
which I think are
Los
economic,
creo que son más que
and
todo
providing
económicos
a more
para
fair,
proveerle
structurally fair
una
society,
sociedad más
and
económicamente justa
greater political justice as well.
y una más políticamente.
One
Un
example
ejemplo es
of the structural violence
de la violencia
is the
estructurada es
connection
la
to
conexión
the
entre
growth of
el crecimiento
illicit
de
crops.
los
And farmers are seem to be acting rationally, right? They grow crops that sell in the market, whatever that market might be. So the solution there seems very simple solution. Not so simple, but very complex, but is to provide them with greater economic opportunity.
A los
And they
campesinos
would
que están
be
cultivando
very willing not to grow illicit crops if there were viable
algo de intercambio para
for
que
their livelihood.
no se sigan prestando para
But
este
that
tipo de
speaks to
actividades.
the whole institutional structure of your
Y pienso que hay mucho
society
con el tema
and its
estructural.
historic distortions of unfairness. We have them too,
Tenemos
of
también en
course,
nuestros
in the United
países, en los
States.
Estados Unidos,
There's
también
considerable
hay
structural
mucha
violence in the
violencia
United
estructural en los
States,
Estados Unidos,
considerable social injustice
injusticia
for generations
por generaciones
around race
sobre la raza
in particular.
en particular,
But also
pero también
economically, we have
económicamente
profound
profunda,
economic inequality.
Ine-
We're becoming one of the most
líquida.
unequal countries in the
Estamos
world,
convirtiendo en un país más
between the rich and the poor.
con una
And that's not,
inequidad
democracy is not
económica
sustainable under those conditions.
sustancialmente grande.
Okay, Dale. Okay, we have to close
Tenemos
the session.
que
Thank you
cerrar
very
la
much
sesión de
for
preguntas y
your
respuestas.
lecture. That's
Gracias por
amazing.
su conferencia.
Muchas gracias a todos. Hora del cafecito.
Muchas gracias.
15 minutos. Un momentico, una información aquí de los organizadores.
Agradecemos su participación en esta primera parte. Los invitamos saliendo a mano izquierda, vamos a encontrar un refrigerio y posteriormente 10:30 de la mañana vamos a tener el panel 1, Formación Ciudadana, Ética, lo Público y Corrupción, en el auditorio Ernesto de Lima, ubicado en el edificio L. Y el panel 2, Educación Ambiental y Territorio, ubicado en el auditorio Varela, edificio B. 10:30 de la mañana los esperamos. Un feliz break. Les recordamos la jornada de la tarde se va a llevar a cabo a partir de las 2 de la tarde en la Universidad Autónoma de Occidente. En la parte posterior está ubicado un código QR para que lo escaneemos y podamos tener información puntual de cada una de las ponencias que se van a realizar en la Universidad Autónoma de Occidente.